Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little, and I'm here today with the 12th episode of Weekly Poker Hand. And in this episode, we're playing a hand from I believe it was a $1,500 buy-in event at Borgata. It was not one of their main events, but it was sort of like a big preliminary event. I believe at this tournament series, they did something like a $3,500 on one Saturday, and then the Saturday before that, they did a $1,500. So that's what this event is. It's from early in the tournament. Notice we are still very deep stacked. I've chipped up a little bit to 50,000 chips. I believe we started with 30 or maybe 40. I don't know what it is. The blinds are 150, 300, so I have a ton of big blinds. And I have 7-5 suited. So under the gun, tight passive guy limps. Middle position guy also limps. And it folds around to me in the cutoff with 7-5 spades. So what do? I think my only options are to call or raise. I don't think I should be folding in this spot very often at all. Even though my hand is certainly behind at the moment, it has tons of implied odds, meaning that if I get a good hand, I stand to win a lot of chips, and if I miss, I'm just going to lose almost nothing. So I'm a very big fan of calling and seeing what develops. I don't really like raising under the gun limpers because quite often they have strong-ish hands, and I don't really want to take my hand against a strong hand whenever I'm even in position. I don't think it's going to be that great. All right, so the flop comes 7-2-2 with one spade. They check all the way around to me, and I decide to bet 1,300 into the 1,800 chip pot. And this is a bet mostly for value and protection. I mean, clearly I'm value betting here. And I'm betting because I don't want to check and let any random overcard come that could kill my action. I think that would be very bad for me. Like, say even an 8 comes and someone decides to bet. At that point, I've pretty much have a bad bluff catcher. And I don't really want to have a bad bluff catcher. I want to have good hands. So I decided to bet the flop for 1,300. And if I get called, it's not like I'm happy, but I do think a lot of players will call with stuff like 6s through 3s, so for the middle pairs, and also various ace-high hands. So I do think I can conceivably get value out of this bet. The player in the small blind calls, and the other guys fold. So heads up on 7-2-2. The turn is a5, so now I have 2 pair. And my opponent checks. So the pot's 4,400, and now I have 2 pair on 7-2-2-5. It's very important to note that this 2 pair is not amazingly strong, because if my opponent has pocket 8s or better, then I'm just crushed and drawing almost dead. So you have to be a little bit cautious in this scenario and not just blindly pile your chips in, because it's not nearly as good as if the board was 7-3-2-5, because then I'd have a good 2 pair. Also, my opponent is loose and aggressive, so I expect him to be a little bit more of a calling station than tighter players. You're going to find that most tight players will call one time with stuff like ace-high, but then fold to a turn or a river bet. But a lot of looser players will be a little bit more prone to get out of line. So in this scenario, I think I need to bet again. And if I bet, I don't think it needs to be too large. I think I need to bet something like 2,500 into the 4,400 pot. Let's see what I did. Oh, perfect. 2,500. It's always nice whenever I see myself take the exact same line I would have taken. Or I see myself taking the same line now as I took back then. So I bet 2,500. I think that's a pretty good size. I think we can easily get called by the worst pairs, easily get called by ace-high from a loose player. So I think this is a pretty good bet size. If I get check raised on the turn, I'm probably just going to fold. Don't tell my opponents that. But I probably would just fold if I got check raised. So river's a queen of clubs. So no flush draws or anything like that. I definitely think I could check behind on the river. But given that I think this guy probably has pocket 6s, pocket 4s, pocket 3s, or ace-high at this point, I think I need to value bet. Also notice I do beat the random 7s, right? Like, say he does have ace-7. I beat that because I have 7-7-5-5 queen. He has 7-7-2-2 queen. Or 7-7-2-2 ace, whichever one it is. So I definitely think I can get value from a 7, from the pairs, and maybe from ace-high. So the question then becomes, if I bet, which size should I pick? And I don't think it needs to be that big. I think if I bet huge, like say I was to bet 8,000 into the 9,400 chip pot, that's going to give my opponent the opportunity to just fold. And I really don't want to let him fold. So I think I need to make a smaller bet to try to get called by at least the 7s. And then the question becomes, do I need to make the bet even smaller to try to get called by ace-high? So the way this works is maybe he calls with a 7 100% of the time if I bet 5,000, right? but he'll only call 100% of the time with ace high if I bet 3,000. So then the question becomes, what percentage of his range is a 7 versus what percentage of his range is ace high and the smaller pairs? And I think it's probably, those two bets are probably going to be somewhat equal in terms of equity. And you have to look at how often does each bet get called compared to the opponent's entire range. And usually you're going to find that bigger bets are better whenever you have a very good hand. And this is effectively a pretty good hand. It's not like I'm concerned with being beat at this point. But at the same point, you have to ask yourself, what am I trying to get called by? And is that hand actually strong on this board? And if he's sitting here with 8-7 on 7-2-2-5 queen, it's not that great by the river. So I think I need to be betting smaller. Against most players, you're going to want to bet smaller when you're trying to get value from crappy hands, and bigger when you're trying to get value from good hands. And this is a spot where I think most of his hands are going to be fairly crappy. So I think I need to bet small if I'm going to bet. I probably would bet something like 3,500. Well, good, 3,500. I think I would bet something like 3,500 into the 9,400 chip pot, because I do think we can still conceivably get called by ace highs. Because, I mean, my hand does not have to be that strong. It could easily be strong when I bet the river at 3,500, but a lot of opponents won't realize that. They'll just look at their pot odds and say, well, you know, my 7's probably good a lot, or my pocket 3s are probably good a lot, maybe like 30% of the time. But in reality, when I take the sizing, his pocket 3s are probably good about 0% of the time. However, a lot of people don't know that, and they're like, well, I'm getting good pot odds, so I have to call. So I do bet 3,500, and he calls. I show my hand, and I scoop the pot. So it's always nice when that happens. I mean, I think that we probably got more value out of this hand than I normally would. Well, not necessarily that I normally would, but a lot of players normally would, because a lot of players may not bet the flop. They may decide to check behind the turn for whatever reason. And the queen river, I think, would scare a lot of people into betting again, because notice if my opponent just has a queen, right? Like say it randomly has ace queen or something, or queen 7, then I just lose, and that's always bad. But I think when I bet the river, well, when you bet a river, you need to be getting called by worse hands more than 50% of the time to justify a value bet, and I think I'm going to be getting called by a lot of worse hands in this scenario. So pretty standard value bet for me. I'm not sure if everyone makes that value bet on the river, but I think it's pretty normal. While I have you guys here, I wanted to discuss with you a webinar that I made recently where I discussed the true value of top pair. And while this hand was not exactly top pair, it was certainly similar. You know, it's a marginal hand that's probably good, but maybe not. And I feel like a lot of players really mess up playing hands like this. And in this webinar, I definitely think there's a ton that almost any player, well, I think there's something in the webinar that anyone can learn from. And I think there's a lot of good information that a lot of players do not really think about. It seems like whenever I watch amateur players play, they either vastly overplay or vastly underplay top pair. And that's a really bad thing to do, because you do make top pair often. That's going to be the most common value hand you have. So if you do butcher your top pairs often, you're not going to be doing too good in poker. So if you want a more in-depth discussion, I mean, the webinar is probably 4 hours long or so. It's a very, very deep discussion on how to play top pairs in all situations. Definitely check out that webinar. You can get access to that webinar and all of my other webinars at jonathanlittlepoker.com/videos. So just jonathanlittlepoker.com/videos. Check that out. I think that there's something there for everyone to learn from. There's also videos on bluffing, videos going over all of the World Series of poker hands I played, all sorts of different content. So definitely go there and check that out. And if you have any comments or suggestions about any of those products or this Weekly Poker Hand podcast, definitely let me know. This has been Jonathan Little for Weekly Poker Hand. Thank you for watching.